Our next conversation, we're going to shift focus a little bit and move to kind of the topic du jour, AI. If I have to read another think piece about OpenAI and what happened, which is actually a great way to frame this conversation, because so much of what we're being told, what's being talked about, is these huge existential issues, right? The same people that are creating these AI systems are also the doomsayers, saying that we're all going to be extinct from them. And what they're all ignoring is the harms that these systems are causing today, that they were causing yesterday, that they were causing 5 years ago, because AI is not new, right? We all work in this field. We know what an algorithm is. We know how predictive technology has already been baked into the information ecosystem and social media companies. And so our next panel is a series of experts who are working on those issues right now, who are thinking about the ways in which AI is being used to discriminate against communities who are, quite frankly, used to being discriminated against, and the other, multitude of harms that could come from AI's involvement in our day-to-day life. And so I'm thrilled to welcome, there we go. I don't want to screw up anyone's titles. So I'm thrilled to welcome Amba, who is the Executive Director of AI Now. She's also a senior research scientist at the Cybersecurity and Privacy Institute at Northeastern University and a globally recognized voice in AI and technology policy. Please welcome her to the stage.
Okay, this is on. Yes, it's on. So very honored to be here and honored to be hosting this fireside chat with two government leaders that are really at the forefront of defining what it means for technology to work in the public interest and also making significant progress towards that goal. First, we have Director Prabhakar, Director Arati Prabhakar. She's the President's Chief Advisor for Science and Technology, Assistant to the President, and Director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Director Prabhakar, could you join us on stage? I'm also very honored to have with us today Director Rohit Chopra, the Director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, a unit of the Federal Reserve System charged with protecting families and honest businesses from illegal practices by financial institutions and ensuring that markets for consumer financial products and services are fair, transparent, and competitive. I want to maybe do a more extended version of this bio, just to get into a little bit of your background, and then we'll get into the meat of the conversation. Just to speak to Director Prabhakar's experience, she's an engineer and applied physicist with broad management and leadership experience. Director Prabhakar served as the director of DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, from 2012 to 2017. And in 1993, she was confirmed by the US Senate as director of NIST, becoming the first woman to lead the agency. Director Chopra in 2018 was unanimously confirmed by the US Senate as a commissioner in the Federal Trade Commission, where he served until assuming office as CFPB director. Director Chopra was a leading voice for big tech accountability at the FTC, where he successfully worked to strengthen sanctions against repeat offenders, to kind of reverse the agency's reliance on the no money, no fault settlements in fraud cases, and to halt abuses of small businesses. So with that, this is a very esteemed panel. I want to kind of get into it. We are in a moment of tremendous opportunity. There's the appearance and perhaps the actual existence of tremendous momentum and consensus around the idea that we do need to ensure that the future trajectory of AI sort of bends towards public values, but it's also a kind of noisy moment, and we're seeing a lot of competing narratives compete for what will actually set the policy agenda. So I want to, it's been a very busy year. I want to start by asking you both to share some of the actions your offices have taken to address both the kind of more novel and more familiar challenges with AI. Director Prabhakar, if we could start with you.
First of all, thanks for the chance to be here with this group. But the community that's here has played such an important role in, you're right, it's a very noisy conversation, but keep making your noise because it's such an important contribution. I'll just kick off by providing a frame for how we have approached artificial intelligence here in the Biden administration. And for us, it started with a recognition that AI is one of the most consequential technologies of our time. Both President Biden and Vice President Harris have been clear from the beginning that we have to manage its risks so that we can seize its tremendous benefits. And so the approach that we've taken really does start by recognizing that, like every powerful technology in all of human history, has been used for good and for ill, and we don't think AI is going to be any different. As everyone here knows, AI, this particular technology, is something that people use by first training on all kinds of data. Here we are in the information age, so there's so many kinds of data to train on. There's sensor data and scientific data, there's administrative data and financial data, there's all the data that we generate when we're clicking and surfing around on the web in the online environment. And of course, there's language and media, which has been the data on which the current generation of generative AI has been trained, the thing that has sort of captured the public imagination. Although again, as I think was just being said in the introduction, I think everyone here understands that this era of machine learning AI has been with us already for quite some time, and it's already embedded in the world that we're living in. So the fact that this technology has all these different sources of data that it can be trained on means that it's extraordinarily broad, and its applications are extremely varied, but each one has a bright side and a dark side. And just a few examples to just get at the sense of how broad it can be. If you're designing cars, you can use AI to help make cars safer, or to cause people to lose focus and attention and start taking it for granted. If you are a biologist, you can use artificial intelligence to engineer cures for diseases that we thought we were never going to cure, or you can use it to build biothreats that have never been seen in the world before. If you are a bank or a mortgage lender or an employer, you can use AI to really dramatically change how you do, speed up how you do application processing, but of course you can embed bias into those decisions. If you think about workers' lives, we know that AI could be used and can be used in some places to allow workers to do more and earn more, but we also know that today AI is being used to surveil workers. We know that it can hollow out and even eliminate jobs. And then again, back in our online environment, we already know that when we're online, whether you're searching for a recipe or searching for a community or searching for a mate, whatever it is you might be doing online, we know that AI is behind everything that we're interacting with. And we know that in the process, it's already eroding our information environment, the integrity of our information environment. It's eroding our privacy. We know for too many of our kids, it's eroding their mental health. And in the process, of course, it's concentrating power in the hands of fewer and fewer firms. So, this is what's going on already today, and the technology continues to move. And so this is what's on our plates. So what did we do about it? Well, both the president and the vice president were clear that we needed to move with great urgency, and we did. We started, in fact, before this era of chatbots burst on the scene and captured everyone's imagination. A year ago in October, so October of 2022, OSTP and the White House published a blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. And that was such an important start, because that was where we put a stake in the ground and said, this is what we value: safety, transparency, making sure that we have freedom from discrimination. Privacy is critically important. And, it's always important to understand what your values are as you're trying to get your work done, but especially when we are in the kind of choppy waters that we're in today with this technology moving so rapidly, there is no more important time to steer by the light of these fundamental values. So that was an important start. The work that has gone on in the administration since then has been very broad. The president called on companies to step up and agree to voluntary commitments. We made progress on that front. We have been and will continue to work with Congress on a bipartisan basis on legislation. We have been and will continue to work with our like-minded partners and allies around the world, because we know AI doesn't stop at the borders. But while we're doing all these other things and really calling on everyone else as well to step up to meet their responsibilities, it was always clear to us from the beginning, and the president was very clear with us, that his administration and the executive branch have a very significant role to play. And about a month ago now, the president signed a very substantial executive order. It's the most significant set of actions that have been taken on artificial intelligence really anywhere in the world. And it's voluminous. And if you've had a chance to dig through it, you will see that it's, by design, it's very comprehensive and broad. It's taking on the breadth of applications, the breadth of risks and harms, and making some very significant progress on issues from privacy to workers' issues to issues of discrimination and bias to issues of safety and security. And I think in doing that work, with the work that many independent agencies, individual agencies have stepped up to, Rohit's going to talk about some of the very important things that they and others who are the independent enforcement agencies have been doing. That work, the work of this executive order, on its heels, draft guidance that the Office of Management and Budget put out, with guidance to agencies about how we're going to use this technology in ways that are responsible and powerful. These actions together, I think, really do take some very important steps forward. There's a lot more work to be done, and I want to both thank you for the contributions that you have made, because we did all of this work in very close, in a context in which we were listening to, reaching out to, trying to hear perspectives from all different angles. And the work that we did with civil society, with civil rights organizations, consumer protection organizations, labor unions, those were critical inputs. And I want to really make sure that we keep getting that help and support, because while I'm very pleased with this first set of steps, as I think we're all very clear, there's a lot more to do. So I'll open it with that and turn it to you, Rohit.
Well, also want to echo the big thanks to Accountable Tech and others, many of you we've been working with for many years now. Let me just offer a couple of reflections of how I view the changes from inside the buildings. And one of the things that was quite striking to me, I actually, I've served in government a few different times. If I rewind back about 8 to 10 years ago, I have such a vivid memory of my focus was student loan accountability for the companies, you know, all the companies in that industry. And I remember we were quite publicly clear with the big tech companies that they are trafficking so many scams, targeting student loan borrowers. And there was a sense even in the government of, wait, why are you saying it to them? They're like our heroes. There was a true kind of hero worship mentality of a lot of these large tech players, and a certain cultural capture that I think was quite embedded very broadly in the government. When I got to the commission, the FTC in 2018, you were seeing very, very blatant violations of commission orders by some of these large firms, almost as if it was a rite of passage for them. That look, oh, we can get away with this. And I really was worried about that, because you mentioned earlier public values. I would say also rule of law, honoring what the public has said are expectations. And I think we are doing a lot to reaffirm existing law on the books and how does it really apply. In financial services, we have long dealt with AI. You know, there was so much criticism many years ago about the in China, the sort of surveillance and scoring. We've had that here too. It's called the FICO score. You know, they train this to create a 3-digit number about you that has so much impact on your life. It's completely opaque to the public what goes into it. and you feel like you're in a game about how to make you don't know why your score sometimes is going up and down. So we have really brought to the forefront a number of rules, guidance, regulatory actions to make crystal clear there is not a fancy technology exemption in federal law. So one, with respect to all sorts of AI-driven lending decisions, we have made clear to financial institutions and others, you are required under federal law to give a clear statement of reasons as to why you got a denial or adverse decision. And guess what? If you can't do it, you cannot use that. Second, we've made clear that if you are doing it, you can't fake the reasons. We've also looked a lot at generative AI and especially chatbots. I think we did one of the first sector-specific uses of chatbots, which you see in banking. Example, they are all given human names like Bank of America's Erica, trying to simulate human interaction. And we've made it clear if the chatbot is giving you wrong information or not allowing you to assert your federal rights and more, that's a violation. We know that AI and generative AI is a growing vector of fraud, targeting vulnerable individuals, copying voices and cloning voices. And again, we are trying to make clear about the responsibilities of everyone in it rather than throwing the technology into the world and shrugging when something goes wrong. So all of that I think is an alignment with what the executive order is, but we have to do so much more and more quickly. We have brought a number of enforcement actions. One was recently against a conglomerate called TransUnion, which has a tenant screening business using algorithms and other advanced computational approaches to disqualify people from housing. So you have individuals who were routinely and improperly disqualified from housing, and that is such an enormous harm to them as an individual. We've taken other actions about how the algorithm, when it goes wrong, and who's responsible. But I think most importantly, we have started the process of, we're not just a financial regulator, we also administer one of the only nationwide consumer privacy laws called the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which is much more than credit. It covers all background screening and assembly of dossiers about individuals. And we have initiated a rulemaking process to really modernize it for the age of AI. So there's really a long list of things that I think each agency is doing. We're doing rules on AI appraisals, residential real estate appraisals, and I think we need this is an all hands on deck moment, and also to look at the technology dispassionately, using public values rather than kind of hero worship of the individuals beyond it. Let me comment briefly on something Director Prabhakar just mentioned, which is we cannot have a society where technological innovation, that the gains are going to a small clique of people. We have to make sure that advances in technology are not to the benefit of oligopolists, but really broadly shared with public values and meaningful mitigation of the harms, because of course the harm is always going to be concentrated with those who can least protect themselves from it. And I just think that's a very important guidepost of how we have to approach this work.
Thank you both. I feel like what we just heard is, I guess the perfect example of what an empowering policy narrative looks like. And I say that because it stands in stark contrast to this idea or this narrative that tech is moving too fast and that regulation will always be slow to catch up. And there's this sort of kind of notion of inevitability around AI and the trajectory it's going to take. So I think we need to sort of recenter the fact, this conversation, and ground it in both the tools that we have and in present day harms. On that note, I was at the UK AI Summit, which in particular especially in the early days, seemed to be sort of over-indexing on this idea of future catastrophic risks, often in ways that were sort of designed to give companies with like a clean, with stakes in the present, a clean shit. And what was so powerful was that the executive order and that announcement, as well as Vice President Harris's speech while the summit was happening, offered a very kind of powerful counterpoint. And what she said was that, the risk of someone being denied healthcare coverage or someone being misidentified by facial recognition is an existential risk. And I say this because, as I said earlier, there are a lot of competing narratives, and I think this is the empowering one that we want to uplift as civil society.
That for just a minute,
sure.
because I think this is such an important point, and I loved the Vice President's speech on this issue. And Rohit, you talked about what happens when a mortgage is denied. So, I think we have to talk in a very real way about what the risks and harms are. It's actually true that when people are concerned about cybersecurity, attacks on critical infrastructure, biological threats, yes, those are real risks that have been significantly exacerbated as AI has progressed. Those are the kinds of catastrophes that can unfold in, moments or hours even, maybe a week. There's something that's underway that I think we're all very cognizant of that's a very different timescale, but it's also catastrophic, which is how our information environment has eroded, and even the idea of truth itself has eroded. That's pretty fundamental to our democracy and the way our society seeks to function. It doesn't happen in the same short time scale, but it's fundamental. And then finally, bias, when a job is denied, when a mortgage is denied, a rental application is denied, that's something that is a dimmer future for those individuals and for their families. And so those harms can play out over years, decades, lifetimes. But the catastrophe of not achieving this American fundamental notion that everyone gets a fair shot, President Biden is always clear that we've never quite achieved that, but we've never walked away from it either. We can't walk away from that. And the reason we have to think about that in the context of AI is because this powerful technology can scale things at such a phenomenal level. Everyone here knows this, but unless that means that if we're not getting it right, we're going to exacerbate those harms on a phenomenal scale. And so again, I just think and this community's shining a light on how important those risks and harms are, I think, is key to the debate. So please keep doing that.
Thank you for saying that also, because I think there's been this false binary between worrying about now and worrying about the future. And also sort of, I think the lesson from what you're just saying is that one doesn't need to and ideally should not be undercutting the other. And I think that wouldn't be the case. The reason it is the case is because we can see that some of these future-looking conversations are driven by very obvious, narrow industry interests that I think have skin in the game on pushing the regulatory conversation to the horizon rather than the present. So I want to, I guess, shift gears because both of you in different ways brought up this idea of having community voices and perspectives in the mix. And there's been, I think, more than ever, we need not only more voices on the table, but a rebalancing of who has power at the table. And so I wanted to ask you, and this is maybe even, moving away from just AI, experiences from your career where you've seen community voices being kind of brought into a policy conversation or community voices pushing a policy conversation in ways that upholds public values and the public interest.
Well, I'll start by saying that this is central to President Biden's vision for the country and the work that he set out to do as president. One of the very first executive orders he signed was on equity. And in that and a subsequent equity EO, that work included focus on algorithms and AI and making sure that we didn't embed and exacerbate bias in with those mechanisms. So, it starts with an understanding of what our purpose is in public service, but the work gets done because people like you all show up. And so I'll just give you a few examples. Vice President Harris had a wonderful roundtable with leaders of civil society organizations. We had labor leaders, we had people from consumer protection organizations, from all kinds of civil rights organizations, people specifically working on issues of how tech affects different communities. Very robust discussion with that group and specific actions and positions that were advocated for in that meeting and in the follow-up are, there's a line from that to some of the things that you'll see in the executive order, which I think is exactly how it should be. That's a very senior conversation with the vice president leading it. I had the great fun of moderating that discussion. We had a lot of senior White House people there. But that work goes on every single day. With some of our staff is here. They are working with these communities. And I want to be really clear. We talk to the big tech companies. We talk to the entrepreneurs. We talk to the research community. We talk to critics and skeptics. But all of those inputs have to come into us. And then really our job is to stand back and see the whole picture. And to your point, my view is our job for the country, for the United States of America, isn't to just fix one aspect of this problem. An individual organization or an individual can certainly advocate for whatever they think is the most important. But it makes for cacophony, but it's useful. And then I think our job is to integrate all of that into the actions that really can get us on the right path.
Let me offer just a couple points on this. My big push for this group is we all need to be communicating about this in ways that are much more accessible. Because I'll just tell a story. On Saturday, I held a town hall meeting in Inglewood, California with Congresswoman Maxine Waters. And you had a group of people that were not tech industry experts, but when we talked about digital redlining, or FICO scores, or algorithms and appraisals, everyone intuitively really understood the power for this to disadvantage them. And I think that we need to do more, federal, state, local, to be accepting input through virtual hearings, in-person hearings, and ways to force everyone to not exclude a whole set of people from the conversation, because that often is easy to do when it comes to complicated subjects. I also think there's a dimension of this where we need to talk about it in specific sectors. Parents, they understand that there could be problems for their kids online. People who are workers understand how this could be used as another way to get trade deals to override our laws. Financial services, we know there are people who understand intuitively how this could block their access to credit, housing, employment, and more. So I hope that we all are thinking about education, healthcare, financial, the core sectors where people understand the impact on their life and be able to surface those harms more directly, because I think that will make us be responsive to the harms that it could create. And that's really what we and many other agencies are trying to get out of Washington, D.C. to make sure that that direct line exists.
Yeah, and you mentioned accessibility, so that's a good seg, because one of the tools we use as AI policy advocates is to say AI is a little bit like X, Y, or Z, or we need to regulate AI as we regulate other high-risk sectors and products. So I want to talk about analogies, and specifically the Zero Trust AI policy framework was something that we at AI Now and Accountable Tech and EPIC released earlier this year. And like one of the core recommendations we made was the idea that we need to have pre-deployment testing for certain AI tools before they're released on the market. And we need that friction kind of earlier rather than just rely on ex-post remedies. So I wanted to ask, whether you think these are useful remedies, and maybe why it is that AI tools are allowed to be released to the public without that scrutiny today.
So I'll start. We have existing laws in certain sectors of the economy that do require permissioning. So, there's many states where their insurance regulators require some notification or permissioning on how it's used. Of course, anything related to medicine obviously goes through, we wouldn't say pre-deployment testing, but it's testing and approval. So I think we have to inventory what those are and say, are we being a little bit too restrictive in how we're thinking about those existing authorities? And in general, my guess is that the framework you have put forth does actually push the conversation on what kind of harm are we just going to accept as pollution, and really what are we going to make sure we're more precautionary about. We as the financial regulators, I have many of you may be familiar, there was something called high frequency trading that started a few decades ago, and it led in some cases to major significant tremors in the financial markets, and created some instability issues. You wonder whether the deployment of certain AI trading strategies could make those tremors into much bigger earthquakes. We have tools to really guard against that, but it requires not watching from the sidelines in awe, but instead being directly in it and willing to say, wait, we have these laws that Congress has passed, and you have to wait.
Let's start there. Yeah. I think, yeah. Do you want to?
This is a great conversation. I want to chime in. So I want to break your question into two parts. One part is how do you regulate when there are huge rewards but also very substantial risks? And we have on the one hand pharmaceuticals and aircraft and nuclear power plants where yes, you actually have to get a yes before you go forward. But we have many other areas, and insurance at the state level is a great example, where there are regulations and things that have to be complied with. So I think there are a whole host of areas that you could look to understand what might be useful models. But there's a second part of this, a more fundamental part that I think is really worth talking about, and that is, I think there's actually quite broad agreement with this idea that a company or any actor should be able to know that a model is safe and effective and trustworthy before it's deployed. I don't think people are arguing about that. The problem is that when you say, what are our tools and methods to know that this technology is safe and effective and trustworthy before it's deployed, we barely have anything. We barely have anything. And it's one thing to ask that question about a facial recognition tool, and in fact, we've done a pretty good job, I think now, at least NIST now has a standard evaluation methodology that I think works. It certainly has raised the floor on the tools there. That's a fairly narrow question, though, compared to what will a large language model do. The whole,
Yes.
The power of these LLMs and the chatbots that are built on top of them is their general purpose capability, the breadth of their utility. And so the question of, there's been a lot of focus about how opaque and how the technology is unexplainable. First of all, most of what we deal with in the world is unexplainable, so I don't like why is that surprising? But I think what people haven't really focused on is that an interaction that happens between a person and a chatbot, what comes out of that is the consequence of the interplay, not just of this complex, opaque technology, but on the other side are human beings. And you want to talk about complex and opaque, that's us, right? And it's the compounding of that interaction so how do you really actually test and validate and understand the boundaries of this statistical, nonlinear, interactive process? That's one of the most staggeringly difficult, exciting research topics. It's not something for which we have ready to deploy solutions. And so I think a lot of our collective frustration about this is that we're trying to solve these problems with fairly weak tools. And part of the work that we are setting out to do in the executive order, certainly across the research and industrial communities as well, is getting answers to that major question about tools and methods.
Yeah, can I say that what you just said, Director Prabhakar, is sort of the elephant in the room for a lot of us in the policy community, which is that on the one hand, we do think that evaluation and testing, should be law on the books. It should have been law on the books yesterday. On the other hand, what would be potentially even more damaging is if we kind of prematurely put in place an evaluation system that becomes like a checkbox and a meaningless certification. And you could, Rohit, probably write the book on this. Like we've seen from the financial sector that is, probably inevitable, especially if you're going to let industry drive that conversation on what auditing should look like. So thank you for raising that. I want to maybe take another step back and talk about what we're seeing as. Did you want to come in there first?
Well, I just want to share that in terms of the framework you've laid out, we need to understand, do we want this to be at the sector level and have each sector agency describe what would be an advanced use of AI or a potentially risky use of AI that would trigger the pre-testing, pre-approval process, because defining the uses of data is a very, very challenging thing for regulators to be able to do. And being able to determine what's in, what's out, and who is responsible for it, because you also have to create a policy framework that makes the appropriate agencies accountable. So I think that is a place that is something that we should continue to think through, because I do envision over time this approval mechanism will probably be more of a part than less of a part.
Yeah, I think that's also useful, given that the conversation is tending towards should we have licensing or not, and it becomes a very kind of like blunt again binary between yes and no. So the thing I wanted to kind of take a step back and talk about is this idea of AI nationalism narratives. And so we're seeing various countries, China, the UAE, the EU, and of course the US, sort of articulating their vision for what does national leadership on AI look like? And increasingly that's taking the form of massive public investments, whether that's public investments in compute infrastructure or in kind of other ways of promoting AI skilling and capacity building. So I wanted to, there's sort of a more worrying thread in this as well, and it comes up often in the context of China and Chinese AI, which is that is this going to translate into policies, including domestic policies, that therefore tend towards or focus exclusively on national champions? And so the answer to the potential of authoritarian AI is to protect our national champions and win in the China arms race. And that's often undercut many of the demands that we as civil society have been making towards accountability and in favor of kind of greater competition enforcement. So I mean, there's a lot in there, but I guess what I really wanted to ask is, first, just how can the Biden administration really grow its industrial strategy to bend the trajectory of AI towards the public interest and away from private interests?
This is great. I think this is a really key issue. Look, this is a very powerful technology. We're not the only ones who understand that. And so exactly as you would expect, and as you're citing, every country around the world is trying to seize AI to build a future that reflects their own values. And we disagree about many things in this country. The one thing I think we could all agree on is that we don't want to live in a future that's shaped by technologies that have been driven by any authoritarian regime. And that's why we are at a time in which American leadership, our role in the world, our leadership in the world, includes we have to lead on AI. And so I think this is a factor. It's true about our military competitors, and from a national security point of view, it's true about our economic competitors around the world. But I also think that to me this starts and ends with values, because the whole point is that we too want to build a future that reflects our values. And again, I think that means that's why I think it was so important that we started by grounding in our values. And then that's what we steer by as we deal with these the number of conflicting issues and agendas that have to be managed, because we do want to succeed economically, but we don't want our industries to use that as an excuse to run roughshod over safety provisions. I mean, these are just the realities. And I think it reflects how broad, how complex, how powerful this technology is. And I think that, I'm in conversations where people are dismissive of the issues that people in this room care about. And I say the same thing to them, is that we're not going to succeed. We're not going to build the future that's based on our values if we don't keep it all in frame and continue to struggle with these hard issues that you're raising.
The executive order sort of tries to balance all of that.
Very much our work.
So let me comment on the national champions dimension of it. And in general, techno-nationalism, at least when I talk about the regulation of commerce, I'm going to keep out kind of military, other pieces for a minute. it's often peddled by those who have an interest in deregulation or inaction by the state. So I think many of us look at it with that mindset because that has really been the history of this for many, many years. So I think we should always go into that with that base level of skepticism. Now, I will say if we reflect on our history, we must really be thinking about market structure. So is it possible that if you look throughout the AI ecosystem, will there be certain elements that are natural monopolies or oligopolies? And do we want to take a view, as in some ways other jurisdictions have, of a national champion approach? Or do we want to set the terms of the market competition such that there are parts that have much more public governance and parts that are more in the market-based system? We need to nail down those questions, because if you look at over time when it comes to telecommunications, many sectors, the US was much better off with creating a way for lots of people to be in the game with some core safeguards on safety, health, public values, rather than just have a couple companies that were close to the government and therefore got the spoils out of all of it. I'll also add, we also need to make sure we understand how the US often did a better job than other developed economies because we regulated. We created rules. We did not allow a race to the bottom. And so we have to be on guard for the arguments that no rules will be what allows the US to flourish. We just don't have that history in our country at all on so many different sectors. So I do think there needs to be real exploration on the sector-specific pieces, on some core cross-cutting things like competition and antitrust and intellectual property. And I think that will help us really lead and make sure that the technology is aligned with the interest, but also is one that there is enough trust that we can actually continue to build good stuff that will cure diseases and do the things that actually benefit everybody.
And to that point, I think it was both. It was really quite inspiring to see in the president's EO on competition. It has this line, and I'm going to try and quote it accurately, but it basically says that the answer to foreign monopolies or the threat of foreign monopolies is not to tolerate domestic ones. And so I think I feel like it's sort of setting U.S. leadership on these issues in a really kind of powerful way that I guess overcome some of these more narrow framings. I wanted to close, because we just have a few minutes, maybe with a question for you, Director Prabhakar, just on the administration's blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, which was actually released right before ChatGPT in this entire hype cycle, and many of us can actually see reflections of it in the executive order. But I wanted to ask you, how can those in this room engage to help advance some of those principles, most of which we think, or all of which we think are even more important and urgent today?
Yeah, and first of all, I'm very sure there are people in this room who were part of getting us to that point with the blueprint. That was released publicly on my second day in my role. And what a great way to kick off coming in. But it was the work of my predecessors, and most especially Alondra Nelson. And I've told her many times how grateful I am that they undertook that, because I think it was such an important foundation. Look, we are just beginning. I think we're all pretty clear that AI has been underway for a while, but we are in an era where it's accelerating and broadening. And as happy as I am with the progress that we're making, I think we're very clear that we're just at the start. The executive order gave us and many other people across the Biden administration a whole lot of homework, and how that homework gets done will shape how the government uses AI, how we start putting the muscle behind the regulatory structures for all the things that we don't want AI to do that happen to already be illegal, but we actually have to be able to enforce against it. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I think, would not only welcome the continued support and participation, but I think really success here relies on it. So thank you all for that.
Thank you so much. Did you want to?
Well, no, I totally agree. And I think I want to push everyone to push us more. If you agree with what's in that Bill of Rights, I mean, asking every agency, what are you doing to incorporate this into your rules, into your enforcement approach, into your oversight? Because I think we want to make sure when we're all out of office, there's no question to me that we don't want to be reflecting to say, we should have done more in 2023 and 2024. So really push us to do that.
Thank you, and thank you for your clear-eyed leadership on these issues, and thank you for making time to talk with us today.
Thank you so much.
Just before we say goodbye to our esteemed panel, I just wanted to thank you all for being here and representing the administration. We're so thankful that you're taking a whole of government approach to AI through the executive order. And two comments really stood out to me. One, Director Prabhakar, the idea of making sure this conversation is framed in our values is such a good reminder of the basic whole of who we are as humans and as a community, and it's easy to forget in policy discussions. And Director Chopra, the reminder that this has to exist within the market realities is one that I don't take lightly. I think, again, we often like to think about policy in the silo of policy, and the reality is we live in a complex global environment, and we need to acknowledge that when we take action. So thank you again. Can we get another round of applause